The scorching sun hangs over the glassy surface of the ocean. The sails hang limp, a dead weight. On deck, silence. Only the creak of wood and the gaze of empty eyes. The crew stares into nothingness. The rum barrels are empty. The crates are overturned. A dead calm. The last rat was eaten last week. The water in the barrels has turned into a green sludge. But the most terrifying moment came when the captain brought out the short straws. It was a lottery to decide who would become dinner for the rest. The ocean wasn't just calm. It had become a giant magnifying glass, focusing the sun's fury on a single point, their ship. The sea was no longer a path. It had become a prison wall. This trap has a name, the horse latitudes, or the doldrums. For a sailing ship, this wasn't just a calm. It was a death sentence, a slow decline stretched over weeks. This wasn't bad luck. It was a geographical certainty that all mariners feared. The name originated in the 18th century. Ships transporting horses to the Americas would get stuck here indefinitely. To conserve precious fresh water, the crews would throw the animals overboard. These latitudes earned their name from the bloated carcasses bobbing on the waves. The first and foremost problem isn't food. It's water. Fresh water in barrels quickly became a breeding ground for bacteria. It turned green, began to smell, and caused dysentery, an illness that only accelerated dehydration. Drinking seawater to quench thirst is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. The salt draws water out of the cells, leading to kidney failure in a matter of days. Hunger kills in weeks, thirst in days. The staple of their diet was hardtack, or ship's biscuits, hard as rock and almost always infested with weevils. In normal times, this was disgusting, but in the throes of starvation, these larvae became the only source of animal protein. The pirates didn't discard them, they welcomed the meaty addition. It was the first step in breaking down their squeamishness. Sailors called them toothbreakers or wormy castles. Many preferred to eat their hardtack in the dark, just so they wouldn't see how much meat they were actually consuming. It was a simple way to deceive their own minds. But the mind can only be deceived as long as there is something in the stomach. When the last biscuit was gone, the real hunt began. Not for whales or dolphins. The hunt took place in the dank darkness of the hold. The target? Rats. The same black ship rats, Rattus rattus, that they had tried to exterminate with fury just a month before. Now they were the ship's last treasure. A rustle in the dark and a swift strike of a knife. The price of a single rat in this floating market of despair could equal that of a gold coin. The catch wasn't taken to the galley. It was eaten immediately, often raw, in a hidden corner so no one would have to share. When the last rat was caught and eaten, their gaze turned to the inedible. Leather belts, scabbards, boots, even the bindings of the ship's log. The process was agonizingly long. The leather was soaked in seawater for days to soften it. Then, tar, dirt, and salt were scraped off. Afterward, it was boiled for hours until it turned into a nauseating, gelatinous mass. This was no longer food. It was fuel, just calories to keep the heart beating for one more day. The chronicler of Magellan's circumnavigation, Antonio Pigafetta, wrote of the very same thing in his journal. They ate ox hides from the main yard, first soaking them in the sea for 4 or 5 days, and then cooking them over embers. Stop for a second. Look around your room. What is made of leather? The belt on your jeans, your wallet, your shoes. Now imagine that this is your only chance to see tomorrow. What does your shoe taste like? This thought experiment was their reality, and there's an important technical detail here. The leather of that era was treated with vegetable tannins, which made it foul-tasting but theoretically edible. If you were to boil your modern shoe, treated with chromium salts, you would only get a cup of toxic broth. Their desperation was analog. Ours would be a chemical poison. The next item on the menu of despair, candles. Not modern paraffin ones, but tallow candles made from animal fat. For a starving body, this was a concentrate of pure energy. A candle stub was divided among several men. Each would slowly chew their portion, a greasy, waxy mass that stuck to their teeth. It was their emergency energy bar. Disgusting, with an aftertaste of soot but full of life-saving calories. The hemp wick had to be spit out. It was the only inedible part. The ship had been gnawed clean, literally. The rats were eaten. All the leather was boiled down. The candles were melted to the last drop. Bones left over from long-forgotten meals were boiled for hours to extract a bit of paste. But now, even that was gone. The deck was sterile, and dozens of pairs of hungry eyes slowly turned toward one another. They realized a terrible truth. There was only one last source of meat left on the ship. The vessel was no longer a means of transport. It had become a closed ecosystem devouring itself. And when all the biomass, from hardtack to leather belts, was exhausted, the system turned its attention to its most complex and calorie-rich inhabitants. The inventory of survival had reached its final item, the crew. This transition is not a decision. It's a collapse, the breaking of a fundamental taboo hardwired into our species over hundreds of thousands of years. The hunger had to become so unbearable that it could overpower evolution and morality. It is agony, hallucinations, a loss of self. This was confirmed by the famous Minnesota starvation experiment of 1944. Healthy volunteers on a semi-starvation diet exhibited not only physical emaciation, but also severe psychological changes: apathy, depression, a complete obsession with food, and the breakdown of social bonds. Hunger is a chemical solvent that dissolves personality, leaving only instinct. To survive, the brain begins to justify the unthinkable. This is how survival cannibalism is born. It is not a ritual, not an act of aggression. It is a cold, pragmatic calculation. The sailors created a new morality for themselves. It is better for one to die so that the rest may live. They didn't turn into monsters. They became accountants of survival. They conducted a grim inventory where the assets were living people and the expenses, one inevitable death. It was a bloody arithmetic, but in their world, no other equations remained. On the captain's shoulders, this arithmetic pressed with inhuman weight, to watch his entire crew die or to sanction the murder of one of them. Every face he looked at was a comrade, and every face was a potential meal for the others. This is the trolley problem in its most brutal form. Only here, there is no lever to pull from the sidelines. You are tied to the tracks with everyone else, and the only way to stop the trolley is to push one of your own in front of it. Tension mounted. The crew split into factions. Secret plots began to form. The strong began to eye the weak. The ship was on the verge of bloody anarchy. The captain understood that unless he imposed a cruel but clear law on this chaos, they would slaughter one another. A ritual was needed, a mechanism to remove the blame from a specific individual and place it on fate. Drawing lots wasn't about justice. It was a firewall, a psychological barrier that stood between a desperate crew and a bloodthirsty mob. Without this ritual, the ship would have turned into a slaughterhouse within hours. This ritual had a name, the custom of the sea. And it is not fiction. It was a real, though unofficial, maritime practice, a protocol resorted to not only by pirates but also by the crews of merchant and even naval vessels. It gave the act of killing a veneer of legitimacy and order. In 1816, the French frigate Méduse was wrecked off the coast of Africa. The survivors on a raft resorted to cannibalism to stay alive. This horror was so real that Théodore Géricault immortalized it in his famous painting, The Raft of the Medusa, an eternal monument to this custom of the sea. Picture the scene. The captain stands in the center of a circle of emaciated men. In his hand, pieces of straw or wood splinters. One is shorter than the others, a dead silence, broken only by the creaking of the ship. One by one, each man steps forward to draw his lot. His hand trembles. His eyes are fixed on the captain's hand. Jaws are clenched so tight they could crack. The tension thickens with each long straw drawn. It was a game of Russian roulette, but instead of a revolver, there was the captain's hand, and instead of a bullet, a short straw. Each step toward him was a step toward a possible scaffold, with fate itself spinning the chamber. Let's call it a scale of justice. On one hand, it's pure chance. All are equal before fate. On the other, it's sanctioned murder. On a scale from 1, pure barbarism, to 10, grim necessity, where would you place it? Historians and jurists still argue. At the heart of this debate lies the legal principle of necessity. Can the need to survive justify killing? An English court in the famous 1884 case of Regina vs. Dudley and Stevens answered this question unequivocally. No. The law of the land did not recognize the law of the sea. The one who drew the short straw often did not resist. He accepted his fate. Perhaps he was given a last drop of rum or allowed to write a final letter. It was a grim ritual where the victim understood his role in saving the others. There is another striking detail. To further diffuse the guilt, in some cases, not only the victim but also the executioner was chosen by lot. Thus, it became not a personal murder but a collective carrying out of a sentence passed by fate. Everyone became an accomplice. The lot is cast, the victim is chosen. But this is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new nightmare. Now, those who survived had not only to commit a horrific act, but also to live with it, to live alongside those who helped you butcher yesterday's comrade. The first piece of meat gave them the physical strength to live another day, but it inflicted a mortal wound on their psyche. The silence that, according to survivors' accounts, followed this act was more deafening than any storm. The Brotherhood of the Sea was dead, and in its place, a community of ghosts was born. Now, they couldn't look at each other. Every glance was a silent accusation. Every creak of the deck sounded like the voice of the one they had eaten. Paranoia became their new captain, and guilt, their new navigator. What they experienced, we would today call a severe form of collective PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Their ship, even if they were to leave it, became a haunted house in their memory, a prison from which there was no escape. And what if they were rescued? On shore, the custom of the sea held no power. The survivors were often tried for murder. In the case of Dudley and Stevens, which we've already mentioned, the rescued sailors were sentenced to death. Survival at sea could lead to the gallows on land. And here, history takes a chilling turn. The 1884 case contains one of the strangest literary coincidences. The cabin boy they killed and ate was named Richard Parker. 46 years earlier, Edgar Allan Poe wrote the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. In the novel, shipwrecked sailors eat a cabin boy named Richard Parker. And so, this was the real choice before them, to draw the short straw and die, or to draw a long one and live forever with the taste of your comrade in your mouth. The act of eating is an incredibly intimate process. It is the literal consumption of another being, turning them into a part of yourself. So what is more terrifying? To become just a memory to someone else, or to carry a living, digesting memory of a friend inside you for the rest of your days? This story isn't about what they ate. It's about what they became. Physically they survived, but a part of their humanity died on that ship, in the dead calm. That was the price they paid to see the next sunrise, and that sunrise was never the same for them again. They made a deal with the ocean. It demanded a sacrifice and allowed them to live. But by surviving, they became its eternal debtors. They exchanged a piece of their soul for a few more dawns, and each new ray of sunlight only highlighted the emptiness within. So what lesson can be learned from this nightmare? It comes down to 3 brutal rules. Rule 1. A harsh hierarchy of survival exists. Hardtack, rats, leather, candles. Only when this list is exhausted to the last crumb, the last thread, does the door to the final taboo open. Not before. Call it the triage of despair. Like doctors in a field hospital, the sailors sorted their resources from the most acceptable to the most unthinkable. This protocol was not only practical, but psychological. It allowed them to tell themselves, we tried absolutely everything before we crossed the line. Rule 2. The mind must protect itself from madness. To commit the unthinkable, a person creates psychological armor. The custom of the sea, a sacrifice for the crew, the will of fate. Without this self-justification, the psyche would shatter before the body died of hunger. Psychologists call this resolving cognitive dissonance, The conflict between the belief, killing is wrong, and the action, I must kill. The custom of the sea was a powerful moral anesthetic. It allowed them to perform the operation to save the group, even if it meant amputating one of its members. And Rule 3, order is paramount. Drawing lots, for all its horror, is the last attempt to preserve the structure of civilization. It is a barrier against anarchy, where the strong would simply devour the weak. A ritual, even one so terrible, is what distinguishes desperate people from a pack of hungry beasts. It was a desperate attempt to avoid what the philosopher Thomas Hobbes called the state of nature, where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. The lottery, as horrific as it was the last remnant of law in a world where all laws had ceased to apply. Now, for the main question for you. Was what happened on those ships a manifestation of primitive barbarism or the highest form of cold pragmatism? Write just one word in the comments, barbarism or pragmatism. Let's see what the majority thinks. And while you're thinking, here's a fact for you. In many cases, a fair lottery was only proposed after someone suggested killing the weakest, sickest, or simply the most unpopular member of the crew. So what was it? Pragmatism pushed to its limit, or barbarism covered by the fig leaf of ritual?